Chapter 3. I took Chaz to his job. He'd been right. It had only taken 20 minutes to find out where the insider trading had come from. His employers had been so impressed with his work, they'd put him on retainer. It took another 20 minutes to get the paperwork sorted. I'd asked Gua and her siblings if they wanted to come with us, but they were busy filing a complaint with Boog officials, hoping the government would help get Tay back. Most places on Boog kept a handful of staff on shift who spoke the Lays language. For government offices, it was a requirement. Gua and her siblings should have filed a complaint before they'd done anything else, but Lace had an intense fear of authority figures. They'd probably had to work up the courage. The thing was, had Tay been taken by someone on Boog, the government would have exhausted all resources to find him. Him being held on another world complicated matters. My fists curled at my side. It made me angry they willingly left the Lays unprotected out of fear. The Boog government wouldn't eagerly face off against the likes of Hecton Flick. He was a man who moved armies. If he took up arms against Boog, a few other worlds would likely follow suit out of loyalty to him. The Boug government knew that. I didn't see them saving one life when the potential was to lose millions. I didn't begrudge Gua and the others for asking for help, though. It was the right thing to do. If the Boug government stepped up, it would be highly commendable, but I wouldn't wait on them while Tay was possibly beaten and forced to work against his will. After we left Chaz's job, we came back to Boug to regroup. It was nighttime now, and the stars shone even brighter in the sky. We stood outside on my deck working up an attack plan. My brother Blake was here, along with my cousin Greg. Greg was Rakia's brother. Blake walked around the deck, a slick smile on his face. If I tripped him up and broke both his legs, he'd still be smiling. Everything was a joke to Blake. I'd honestly never understood why. He'd been that way since we were children. Some would say our parents had been too strict. I didn't see it that way, though. We were given a set of rules and had been expected to follow them without exception. It was their way of building structure and discipline in us. If we strayed, even just a little, we were punished. Blake always took his punishment with a sarcastic grin, promising he'd most certainly do it again as soon as the opportunity arose. We were so different, yet most took one look at us and knew we were brothers. Apparently, we looked just alike. There were differences, though. I was slightly taller than him. Also, where I was bald, Blake had a head full of curly black hair going down his back. Greg looked like us too. Like me, he wore his head shaved. His skin was a dark brown. We all stood roughly the same height. Many thought all three of us were brothers. I'd called Blake and Greg for backup. I thought it better to be cautious when walking into uncertain situations such as this. They knew about my relationship with Chaz, so they weren't surprised to see him here.
You know,
Blake said, still walking around the deck,
I may have to buy a house here on Boug. Know any good realtors, Rusty?
I stared at him. He smiled at me. If you can't take this seriously, Blake, then maybe you should go home. Chaz, Greg, and I can handle it. Blake had a knife in his hand that he flicked back and forward. The click-clack sound cut into the silence of the night.
You'll need me,
was all he said. Blake was an energy master and a teleporter. Having him with us could be helpful, but he needed to behave himself. Greg's power was explosive. He could look at something and blow it up. All three of us could open portals. This skill usually came in handy during a fight. My first-in-command, Jay, had already sent someone to do recon on the world Gutti. Hecton was in one of his warehouses on the north side of town, waiting for a new shipment to come in. I wouldn't involve the Julam military any further in this. My men would fight for me, but it wasn't their job to defend worlds that posed no current threat to Julam. I wouldn't ask them to do that. Remember, I said, speaking to Chaz, Blake and Greg, the goal is to get Tay back and make Hecton understand he can't do this again. There's nothing more to be done there. Chaz stood by my side, but his eyes kept flickering to Greg. Those two didn't get along well. In Greg's mind, Chaz and the other Crimson guys were the cause of all Rakia's troubles. He saw them as a bad influence on his sister. He wanted them to disappear from her life forever. I shook my head at his inability to admit the truth. Rakia had been running headfirst into danger since we were little. She'd always been a thrill-seeking adrenaline junkie. She'd been throwing herself toward danger daily before she'd met Chaz and the others. How Greg had construed her reckless behavior to be someone else's fault was something I didn't entirely understand. Greg knew how I felt about Chaz, so he stayed respectable, but I could feel the tension brewing between the two. It was made worse because of Chaz's ex, Clink. Greg had recently started a relationship with Clink's sister, Nadia. Maybe she'd told him stuff about Chaz and Clink's relationship. Perhaps she hadn't told him anything, but the air around them when they looked at each other was taut with disaster. Let's keep our wits about us, I said, looking from one to the other. Neither said anything. It's not like they were outright fighting, so I left it alone. Off to the side, Blake flicked his knife, watching them both, a twisted smile on his face. Come on, I said, wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible. I figured we'd portal around the corner from the warehouse Hecton was supposed to be in, so we could consume a few energy bars. Then we'd teleport inside to confront them. Remember, I said before opening the portal, he's probably got 100 bodyguards protecting him. We may have to fight.